Hi and welcome to The Print. My name is Karanjeet Kaur and I'm a writer and an editor. Let's talk today about some troubling judgments given out by our courts. In India's courts in 2025, being an educated woman is to provide evidence against yourself. You will be judged for the dual crimes of consuming alcohol and trusting a male friend. When that friend just happens to sexually assault you, the court will pronounce you responsible for your actions and say that you invited trouble. Because you, as an educated woman, are competent enough to understand the morality of your actions, as Justice Sanjay Kumar Singh of the Allahabad High Court helpfully explained a few days ago. This holds equally true even if you are not an educated woman. For the sake of argument, let's say you are a child, 11 years old, minding your business. The men who grabbed your breasts, broke your pajama string, and attempted to drag you into a culvert before a passerby saved you weren't really trying to rape you. The fact that they didn't actually commit the assault is enough to absolve them. Please, you might be a traumatized minor, but get with the program. Justice Ram Manohar Narayan Mishra of the Allahabad High Court has standards to maintain. Oh, and also, if you've been sexually assaulted multiple times by a man who also circulated your intimate photos online, you should marry him. After all, as Justice Krishan Pahel of the Allahabad High Court said, a person's right to life and liberty guaranteed by Article 21 of the Constitution cannot be taken away. No, not your life and liberty as the victim. We meant the life of your rapist. As you know, marriage solves everything, especially when it binds you legally to your abuser. Now, you might wonder, is this a twisted thought experiment? Are you in a dystopian novel? Sadly, there's no such relief from reality. These are actual judgments from Indian courts, all in the first quarter of 2025. The Allahabad High Court is a particularly egregious epicenter of institutional misogyny, but similar volcanoes are erupting across India's legal landscape. If you stood in front of a map of India and threw a dart with your eyes closed, you'd hit a place that has pronounced a problematic patriarchal judgment. Take the headlines from just the last few months. Earlier this year, a Chhattisgarh High Court judge, Justice Narendra Kumar Vyas, released a 40-year-old man who was convicted of rape and unnatural sex with his wife. The woman had died within hours of the alleged assault and had made a dying declaration against her husband. In 2024, the Supreme Court had to set aside an order from the Calcutta High Court. The order had asked adolescent girls, and I quote, to control their sexual urges as, in the eyes of the society, she is the loser when she gives in to enjoy the sexual pleasure of hardly 2 minutes. Let's not forget that the judgment was being pronounced in the case of kidnapping and sexual assault of a minor. When courts suggest mediation and compromise in rape cases, they let us know that sexual violation is a dispute to be negotiated, not a crime to be punished. The Madras High Court had done exactly that in 2015, before withdrawing the suggestion after a public outcry. When no less than Sharad Arvind Bobde, who during his term as the Chief Justice of India, suggested that rapists marry their victims and questioned whether sex between a married couple can ever be considered rape, he lent institutional weight to the marital rape exception. Perhaps nowhere is judicial patriarchy more alive than in India's stubborn refusal to criminalize marital rape. In 2024, the Union government told the Supreme Court that criminalizing marital rape would be excessively harsh and could destroy the institution of marriage. Women be damned. The government's position was reinforced by courts that were hesitant to intervene in the state-sanctioned violation of women's rights. What's particularly chilling is the legal contortion required to defend this exception. The government acknowledges that a woman's consent isn't obliterated by marriage. Yet, it argues that labeling non-consensual sex within marriage as rape would be too harsh. In other words, a violation is recognized but deliberately left unpunished. This, in the face of glaring evidence from the government's own data that indicates 83% of married women have experienced sexual violence from their husbands. Another pillar upholding this edifice to judicial misogyny is the persistent narrative around the misuse of protective laws like Section 498A of the IPC. These are now Sections 85 and 86 of the BNS and address cruelty against married women. Now, this narrative of misuse was first forged in the cauldrons of men's rights activists on Twitter. This version has gained such traction that it now drowns out the lived reality of millions of women. When courts refer to Section 498A as a weapon rather than a shield, or employ terms like legal terrorism, they fundamentally reframe the power dynamics at play. The actual statistical reality is that domestic violence remains vastly underreported, with only a fraction of cases ever reaching the courts. But this gets buried beneath anecdotal accounts and selective citation of acquittal rates. Indian women should know that all of these judgments and observations are a form of institutional gaslighting. Our fundamental rights are actually conditional privileges that can be revoked any minute. When we drink alcohol or trust men or, get married. The true violence of these judgments lies not just in their immediate impact on individual survivors, but in the precedents they set. Each ruling that blames a victim, each minimization of assault, contributes to a judicial culture that undermines women's right to safety, dignity, and justice. Is there a substantive difference between the opinions espoused by Indian courts and misogynists on Twitter? In fact, this judicial pattern is far more insidious than the rape and death threats issued to Indian women on social media every day. Because draped in the language of reason, law, and impartiality, these judgments offer a patina of legitimacy to disturbingly misogynistic views. When our judiciary fails to recognize this impossible choice between conformity and autonomy, it becomes an instrument of the injustice it is meant to address. This regression is an insult to the slow-moving, hard-won progress that feminist legal advocacy has fought for over decades. And while judges' opinions are a reflection of the society they occupy, some of these observations are hard to read as individual bias and not a collective resistance to women's full personhood under law. The Indian Constitution once promised women equal citizenship. In 2025, we know that that's not entirely true. We only have the freedom to be autonomous so long as the patriarchy permits.